A jagged splinter of green timber cracks under the weight of a heavy iron cannon. A soldier with bleeding hands drags a rope across the unfinished deck of a flat-bottomed gundalow. The frigid waters of Lake Champlain lap against the raw, sappy wood of a ship that was a forest tree just weeks ago. On the shore, a pile of sawdust sits beneath a makeshift shipyard at Skenesborough. In the distance, the sails of the most powerful navy on Earth appear on the horizon. An untrained infantryman stares at the approaching British fleet and realizes he is expected to fight a war at sea. Major General Horatio Gates paced the wooden docks at Skenesborough in the summer of 1776. He surveyed the chaotic shipyards where infantrymen hacked at unseasoned timber with axes and saws. The Continental Army possessed no formal navy and no experienced sailors to man the guns. Gates needed a barrier to stop a British invasion force from splitting the American colonies. He tasked Brigadier General Benedict Arnold with the impossible mission of building a fleet from scratch. Arnold took command of a motley collection of 15 vessels. The ships were constructed from green wood that still bled sap into the lake water. The hulls were structurally unsound and lacked the rigging required for professional maritime warfare. Arnold assigned soldiers who had never stepped onto a deck to operate the heavy artillery. The men learned to handle cannons while the ships were still being fitted with masts. They practiced maneuvers in the narrow, treacherous channels of the upper lake. Every plank of the fleet was a testament to the desperate lack of resources in the American camp. The British governor, Sir Guy Carleton, commanded a professional fleet of 25 superior ships. His vessels featured seasoned timber, professional rigging, and crews of veteran sailors. Captain Thomas Pringle oversaw the British Armada, which included the formidable ship-rigged sloop Inflexible. The British force held a decisive advantage in tonnage, firepower, and tactical experience. Arnold knew his improvised fleet could not survive a direct engagement in open water. He began searching for a location where he could force the British into a disadvantageous fight. The geography of Lake Champlain offered one narrow, rocky strait near Valcour Island. Arnold positioned his ships in a tight crescent formation within the channel. He hoped to negate the British wind advantage by forcing them to sail against the current to reach his line. The American vessels sat low in the water, waiting for the massive British sails to round the bend. The fate of the Hudson Valley rested on the ability of these green timber ships to hold their ground. Arnold watched the horizon for the first signs of the approaching Royal Navy. He prepared to sacrifice his entire command to buy the American Revolution a few more weeks of time. A massive wooden hull rises from the water, built from unseasoned green timber. The ship groans under the weight of heavy iron cannons. These American gundalows lacked the structural integrity of professional naval vessels. The wood warped in the sun and bled sap into the lake. Each vessel sat low in the water, barely stable enough to carry its own armament. Across the water, the British fleet sat anchored in professional formation. Captain Thomas Pringle commanded 25 vessels that represented the finest engineering of the era. The Inflexible dominated the center of the British line. This ship-rigged sloop dwarfed every American vessel in the lake. Its hull consisted of seasoned oak, treated and cured for maritime combat. The rigging remained taut and professional, ready to catch the wind for precise maneuvering. The schooners Maria and Carleton sat alongside the Inflexible, bristling with long-range cannons. The British Armada carried professional sailors, trained in the arts of naval gunnery. Gun crews moved with practiced efficiency across the clean, dry decks. They understood the mathematics of ballistic trajectories and reloading times. The American crews consisted of infantrymen who had traded muskets for heavy naval artillery. Many of these men had never seen the open lake before that summer. They struggled to balance on the shifting, uneven decks of the gundalows. The contrast in tonnage between the two fleets was total. The British vessels possessed the speed and firepower to dictate the terms of the engagement. Captain Pringle waited for the signal from Sir Guy Carleton to move forward. The British governor surveyed the American line from the deck of his flagship. He saw a collection of desperate, amateur-built boats clinging to the rocky shore. The American fleet looked like a collection of river rafts compared to the British ships of war. Arnold observed the approaching British masts from the deck of the Congress. He knew his ships would splinter under the first broadside from the Inflexible. The American commander faced a tactical reality that no amount of courage could solve. He watched the professional precision of the British fleet as it cleared the headland. Every detail of the British construction emphasized the disparity of the coming fight. The American Revolution stood on the edge of total defeat on the water. Could the improvised fleet force a delay before the British guns shattered their formation? The sun rose over the narrow channel of Valcour Island on October 11, 1776. Benedict Arnold scanned the horizon from the deck of his flagship, the Congress. The American fleet sat in a tight crescent formation against the rocky western shore. The ships blocked the path of any vessel attempting to sail south toward the Hudson. Captain Thomas Pringle commanded the British fleet as it rounded the northern headland. The British ships struggled to navigate the channel against the prevailing northerly wind. Sir Guy Carleton watched from his position as his vessels tacked awkwardly against the current. Arnold ordered his gunners to open fire as the British schooner Carleton drifted into range. The air filled with the roar of iron cannons and the splintering of green wood. The American flagship Royal Savage drifted off course during the chaotic opening exchange. It struck a jagged rock formation and sat motionless in the center of the strait. British gunboats surrounded the stranded flagship and raked its decks with continuous cannon fire. The Royal Savage burned as the crew abandoned the vessel to the advancing British. Smoke billowed across the water and obscured the lines of the remaining American ships. The battle raged for 8 grueling hours within the cramped confines of the channel. Cannonballs tore through the unseasoned timber of the American gundelows. Splinters of oak flew across the decks and caused severe casualties among the infantry crews. 60 American sailors fell dead or wounded during the intense exchange of fire. The British fleet suffered 40 to 60 casualties as they pushed their advantage. The Congress sustained heavy damage as British shells smashed into its hull. Arnold watched as the structural integrity of his fleet vanished under the relentless bombardment. The British maintained their superior position and prevented the Americans from breaking out. Nightfall brought a temporary end to the deafening roar of the naval engagement. The two fleets remained locked in the narrow passage as darkness settled over the lake. The American Revolution faced a total collapse on the water as the day concluded. Would any of the surviving American vessels escape the trap before the next morning? Darkness descended over the narrow channel of Valcour Island on October 11, 1776. Thick fog rolled off the surface of Lake Champlain and swallowed the charred remains of the American line. Benedict Arnold paced the splintered deck of the Congress. The flagship sat low in the water, its hull riddled with British iron. He observed the dim lanterns of the British fleet anchored just a few hundred yards away. Captain Thomas Pringle kept his vessels in a tight blockade across the southern exit of the strait. Sir Guy Carleton expected the remaining American ships to surrender at first light. The American commander realized the only path to safety lay directly through the British blockade. Arnold ordered his men to muffle the oars with heavy wool blankets. The sailors worked in total silence as they prepared the remaining gundelows for departure. The iron cannons remained secured to the decks to prevent any metallic clanking against the wood. A light breeze stirred the fog as the American ships began to drift forward. The Congress led the column, moving at a crawl through the black water. Arnold stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the faint silhouettes of the British masts. The American ships passed within hearing distance of the British sentries. The water lapped softly against the hulls of the fleeing vessels. No alarm sounded from the British line as the American fleet slipped through the gap. The darkness masked the damage to the American masts and rigging. The surviving vessels cleared the British position and turned toward the southern horizon. The American fleet moved deeper into the thick, protective cover of the lake fog. Sir Guy Carleton remained unaware that his trapped prey had abandoned the channel. The British fleet sat motionless in the dark, waiting for a morning that would bring no combat. Arnold steered his command toward the distant safety of Crown Point. The strategic gamble of the previous day had bought the Americans a few hours of life. The revolution survived the night because of a silent, desperate retreat through the enemy line. The American fleet vanished into the vast expanse of the lake. The British commanders would wake to find the channel empty and the American ships gone. What would the British command do when they realized the path to the Hudson remained blocked? The sun climbed over the southern horizon on October 12, 1776. The battered American fleet crawled toward the safety of Crown Point. The Congress leaked water through jagged holes in its wooden hull. The sails hung in tatters from the masts of the surviving gundelows. Benedict Arnold watched the rear of his column from the deck of his flagship. The wind remained light and offered little speed to the fleeing vessels. Captain Thomas Pringle spotted the retreating ships from the deck of the Maria. The British fleet caught the scent of blood on the cold lake air. Sir Guy Carleton ordered his fastest vessels to pursue the broken American line. The British ships gained ground steadily throughout the morning hours. The wind shifted against the Americans on the morning of October 13th. The surviving vessels struggled to make progress toward the safety of the fort. The British fleet closed the distance near the landmark of Split Rock. Cannon fire erupted once more across the gray surface of the water. The Congress took heavy hits from the superior British long-range guns. The rigging of the American flagship collapsed under the weight of metal. Benedict Arnold realized the escape had reached its final limit. He ordered the fleet to turn toward the western shore of the lake. The American crews steered their sinking ships into the shallow mud. The Congress struck the bottom with a heavy, grinding thud. The other 4 remaining gundelows grounded beside the flagship. The sailors scrambled over the rails and waded into the freezing water. The men dragged what supplies they could carry onto the rocky beach. Benedict Arnold ordered his men to set the ships on fire. The dry, unseasoned wood caught the flames with immediate intensity. The Congress burned as the British fleet drifted within range. The American commander stood on the shore and watched the fire consume his fleet. The flames illuminated the surrounding trees as the ships turned into skeletons. The British ships ceased their fire as the vessels became unusable wrecks. The American soldiers turned their backs to the lake and the burning fleet. The men began the long, grueling march through the wilderness toward Fort Ticonderoga. The strategic delay had finally reached its absolute conclusion. The British fleet anchored near the smoldering remains of the American gundelows. Sir Guy Carleton surveyed the shoreline through a brass telescope. The smoke from the burning ships drifted across the surface of Lake Champlain. Winter arrived early in the Adirondack Mountains in late October 1776. Ice crystals began to form along the edges of the rocky coves. The British commander studied the reports from his scouts regarding the road to Fort Ticonderoga. The logistical challenge of moving a heavy army through the mud and frost appeared insurmountable. Sir Guy Carleton weighed the risks of a late-season siege against the safety of his troops. He issued the order to abandon the campaign on October 20th, 1776. The British fleet weighed anchor and turned back toward the St. Lawrence River. The invasion of the Hudson Valley ended before it reached the colonial heartland. Benedict Arnold arrived at the gates of Fort Ticonderoga with his exhausted men. The Continental Army held the high ground at the southern end of the lake. Major General Horatio Gates received the report of the fleet's destruction. The strategic stalemate provided the Continental Army with a full year to recover. The delay of 1776 directly influenced the tactical preparations for the 1777 campaign. The British missed their window to split the American colonies in two. The victory at Saratoga in the following year relied upon the time bought at Valcour Island. The green timber of the gundelows served its purpose as an immovable wall. The sacrifice of the fleet changed the trajectory of the entire war. You stand on that same shoreline now, watching the embers of a history that never truly cooled. The fog that once hid a desperate retreat still rolls across the water, masking the same cold dangers that faced the men of 1776. The trap is not a relic of the past. It is a cycle that waits for the moment you think the path ahead is finally clear.